Hello everyone, Ogre27 Kane here today, and I want to do a review of Signalis for the Nintendo Switch. Let's do a real quick overview, find out what this game's all about. This is a third-person action horror title, much in the same vein as the original Resident Evils, or Parasite Eve if you're familiar with that. It has a top-down perspective and a pixelated art style, and all of this works together to create a good amount of immersion and horror. They do a fantastic job interpreting their art. So let's get into the first category, the story. The story in this game is very fragmented and broken, and relies heavily on your own interest in it. The pieces to the puzzle that you pick up and include are how you interpret it. None of this is voice acted, and you basically have to interpret the emotions of the characters in which you're involved. On top of that, it takes place on a foreign world involving robots, or cyborgs rather. I don't want to explain too much on that, but it revolves around a colony and exploring and figuring out what happened and looking for a certain person. You don't necessarily know why you're drawn to this person, but you have a photograph and a memory, and you start there, and that's where the journey really begins. Now, as you begin to uncover what happens, you slowly begin to uncover the horror to it. It starts out with a lot of grisly-looking characters and a lot of grisly-looking things, but you don't necessarily know why you should have any fear of them. As you begin to uncover and discover what is going on, the fear and tension begins to grow. On top of that, the game has some fantastic boss fights that build a lot of tension themselves. The game works really hard to keep you involved and invested and wanting to see the next area. The story is really good in this game and one of the highlights to it, so I can't really spoil too much of it. Well, with that being said, I think we should move on to the next category then, the gameplay. And the gameplay in this is what you'd expect from a third-person action horror title. You go from room to room, you explore and pick up items, solve puzzles, heal yourself, fight enemies. It's the usual mix, but it has a really good story that keeps you moving from place to place. It's not necessarily what you'd really consider an original gameplay loop by any way, shape, or form. But what they did do is they took a really good loop, a satisfying loop, and they added a really good horror story in between it. So when I go from room to room and I explore and I'm looking for even basic things, there's still a certain amount of tension drawn to it. On top of that, when you kill an enemy, you don't really kill them, and they're very likely to pop up and stalk you in that room again. So it adds even more tension to what's going on. With the puzzles, you have your traditional sort of Resident Evil style puzzles. Collect an item, put the item in another item, which then you have to contort or conjecture into a hypothesis to use on another item, and so on and so forth. Luckily and thankfully though, all of these items and all these puzzles are interconnected in fairly short distances from each other. So you don't have to spend the whole game racking your brain on where was this at or where was that at. On top of that, the map that you have highlights these areas that you haven't solved yet, and it gives you opportunity. So let's move on to the next category, graphics and animations now. Well, let's start with the graphics. And the graphics are an odd mixture of 2D pixel art set with a 3D aesthetic. And at first I was really kind of turned off. I thought it made everything look really muddy. But then after finally fully understanding the art style and realizing that it allowed them to change and manipulate the environment to show things in the way they want you to see them. And it's an interesting art style, but it serves their purpose extremely well. And I never had frame rate or issues dropping, cutting off, quitting, dropping out of the game. I never had any sort of performance issues whatsoever. So the graphics are very stable and they do their job. They hold on well too. All of the characters, after you begin to look at them, are well defined too. The game wants you to stop and look at these things and enjoy them. And as far as the animations go, they're all very smooth. As you can see here, even in death, the characters still have an odd throw move to them. So they invested a lot in terms of the animation quality and the frames of animation with what they were trying to accomplish with this simplistic pixel art graphics. It's really unique, and honestly, it's grown on me a lot. I really enjoy this game, so I think we should get on to the next category, the combat. So the combat in this game is very similar to what you'd find in Resident Evil 1 or 2. You have a pistol or a shotgun, and you can pick up one-time use items or weapons that allow you to manhandle or manipulate enemies. You have limited ammunition. You have certain slot requirements, that you can utilize. You can't max out a bunch of ammunition, carry tons of weapons. The game wants you to fight in survival mode the entire time, and it really works well. On top of that, with the enemies not dying, you really have to conserve that ammunition and decide whether or not it's worth even wasting the bullet to get through that room. Now, at first, the combat was really difficult for me to get a handle on, because you have to hold down the trigger to get your weapon out, and then you have to aim with the right stick while moving your character with the left stick and utilizing the fire button with the right trigger. So all these things in combination are a little difficult at first to get used to, but once you do, you get a pretty good handle on it. It's the only time I found it frustrating was when I was trying to aim at distant characters. Your accuracy kind of goes out the window, and it makes it difficult to get your little laser pointer on them. But other than that, up close, the combat works pretty well. The scare factor definitely will throw you off and make you miss a few times, but there's nothing wrong with that. So let's move on to the next category, controls and audio now. So we'll start with controls, because I mentioned that just a second ago in combat. And the controls are difficult at first, I'm not gonna lie. It took me a good hour or two to get fully adjusted to how they worked. Even when I got to my first boss fight, I still was having a lot of issues with wasting ammunition by not figuring out what I was doing properly. That's not to say that you can't adjust sensitivity and manipulate other things, but obviously there's a learning loop to the game itself that it really wants you to understand. And that's part of what builds the tension to it. Not having a perfect, accurate shot on the first go sometimes is what makes the game a little more difficult. So, I understand what they were going for. Let's hit the audio now. And the audio to me, folks, is one of a kind on this game. The audio in this game is a mixture of synthwave, techno, and excellent classical piano music. And that's a crazy mixture, but it works extremely well. On top of that, all the sound effects are really good. All of the characters have good moans and groans to their voices, and a certain aspect of horror to them as well. I can't speak highly enough on the audio on this game. It really impressed me. So let's do the conclusion now and find out what we really think of this game. Well, in conclusion, this game really surprised me. I picked this up right after I finished Tormented Souls, and I couldn't get myself to play it right away. I had just finished another excellent horror title, and I was a little burned out on it. I gave myself a good break in between, and I came back, and I'm really glad I did, because this game turned out to be absolutely fantastic. All of the horror elements in this game fit really well, all of the tension fits really well, excellent controls, excellent graphics, animations, great combat, great nostalgia factor to it. I can't speak highly enough about this game, and these developers really impressed and surprised me. If you need a good horror experience, this game is digital and physical, so try it out tomorrow. Well, thanks for watching this video. It was a blast to make. I upload every single Monday. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And have yourself a really good day. This is Ogre27 Kane, signing out.